Big fluff.
Robbie!
Robbie! Robbie!
Robbie! Pardue! What are you doing?
Going to join the Great Hall.
You can't. It's a trap.
I have spells. I'm going to fly.
You don't have enough points. I am the maze controller.
Maze control?
Yes. And I have absolute authority in this game.
Game?
Game.
Hey. TJ, what am I doing here?
Hi, everybody. I'm Joel Murphy.
And I'm Andy McIntyre.
And this is Silver Linings Playback, the podcast where we watch maligned movies and we find their silver linings.
And it's the month of October, and we have decided to start off a little differently, not with an outright Halloween or horror movie. We are watching the start of Tom Hanks' leading man movie career, Mazes and Monsters. And here to talk to us about that with us here is Dr. Wendy Fonarow. Welcome, Professor Wendy.
Hi, nice to be here.
Did you ever imagine when you went to all that school that someday you'd be asked to comment on a 1980s made-for-TV movie starring Tom Hanks?
I could only aspire to that because I didn't think anyone would be asking me questions about popular culture. So I'm really happy to be able to apply some of my firsthand experience because I lived through some of the Satanic Panic, although I definitely did not watch this when it was broadcast.
I don't think anyone really did watch it when it came out. I think it was because this was like Tom Hanks's first movie role. And I think it's only remembered or rediscovered because Tom Hanks is in it. I don't think otherwise we would be talking about it right now.
Well, it was a made-for-TV movie and on CBS. And at that time, we did not have as many television options. So made-for-TV movies were pretty big business and would get really good market share. And then it was also based on a book that was fairly popular as well. So,
it is based on the Rona Jaffe novel of the same name, Mazes and Monsters. A thinly veiled reference to Dungeons and Dragons that's never caused controversy ever in its 50 odd years of existence.
Well, right. That is the whole I don't think we stated it, but the theme of the month, the thing that we wanted to kind of talk about this October was Satanic Panic stuff, to look at various Satanic Panic like movies and things. And yeah, this is was all sort of based on, I want to say a true story, but then that even sounds weird because it was based on a true myth, if that makes any sense. Like, where basically there was a person named James Dallas Egbert III who went missing from Michigan State University in 1979. And the media decided that Dungeons and Dragons made him crazy. And that's why he disappeared. So that's what this is based on.
yeah, I would say the media endorsed it because it really seems like it was inspired by the private investigator that the parents sent to find their missing son, who obviously had wanted to be missing. And it turns out that really he was just hanging out in Lansing, Michigan at the houses of various older men. So it does tie in with some of the Satanic Panic, particularly around Dungeons and Dragons, where it seems like there's this displacement between the types of people who would be into fantasy role games and anxiety about sexuality and sexual orientation, and that all getting grafted into some sort of demonic forces on the youth. Of course, sending your 16-year-old to a university, no, that wouldn't have any effect on someone's mood.
Yeah, that is the other thing we should say is he was, I guess, like a child prodigy. So he went to college at 16. There's some speculation about his sexuality. He was very depressed. He tried to commit suicide a few times and then ultimately did commit suicide. The actual story is very unfortunate and very sad. But yeah, so 1970s and 1980s media just decided this game made him crazy. And clearly that was the inspiration for this movie, which honestly, I was a little surprised. The movie doesn't lean as much into the satanic part, but it definitely leads into the game made him crazy.
Yeah, it's definitely that the game is the corrupting agent. And that it twists because you think that JJ is going to be the one who causes all the problems. And then out of nowhere, plot twist, it's Robbie, Tom Hanks's character, that has the psychotic break.
Well, right, because JJ has the backstory. He is the child genius who is depressed and who does plan on killing himself. And then, yeah, it's old bosom buddies Tom Hanks himself that ends up having the break.
It sort of explains the structure where it starts with the scene that is very much taken from the real life account, where instead of it being the tunnels underneath the campus, it's the caves. And they start by saying someone's lost the ability to know the difference between fantasy and reality. And so the expectation for people at that time, everyone would be aware of the case. So you're set up to think it's going to be JJ. And I think that they're sort of floating all of the characters, which is why you've got all those cool cameos by the parents. I mean, that might have been my silver lining for the film.
But yeah, it's interesting to wonder like how it would have played at the time. And I would imagine, I don't know how both of you, like what your experience was with this going into it or not. But I will say, and maybe I'm getting a little ahead of myself, I never in a million years would have guessed how this movie ended. Like when I went into it.
You mean, are we allowed to sort of say anything about the ending? It seems very Streetcar Named Desire. I mean, like at the end, just sort of leaning into the kindness of someone having lost connection with reality because of trauma. And, you know, that I've always depended on the kindness of strangers. So.
Oh, well, yeah. I mean, so you're going for the emotional ending, which is totally valid. But I was more thinking about the fact that he went to the Twin Towers, which they use as a misdirect with like the Lord of the Rings, the Two Towers. And the clip that we played at the beginning where he like presumably seemed like he was about to jump and try to fly. And then his friends show up just in the nick of time to say that they are the maze builder. Is that what they didn't come up with a good?
Is that JJ is the maze controller? Because the last iteration of the game they played was when JJ became the maze controller and they were playing in the caves, and that was like the last straw of his break with reality.
Right, and we get to see two-time Academy Award winner Tom Hanks go like, "I'm so confused" at the end, which is brilliant. Yeah.
This movie is like, I feel like the people that wrote this read that Dungeons and Dragons existed and then like, that's enough. I got it from here. I can figure it out.
Well, it is funny because you can see that early on where they're kind of establishing everyone's like bona fides and they find out that Tom Hanks plays the game and they're like, he's like, I'm a level 8. And they're like, oh, my God, you're a level 8. That doesn't mean anything in Dungeons and Dragons. Just that's a character that happens. Like, that's not, they treat it like it is a cult. Like he's attained right. Level 8 status. But that's not how anything works.
That the level in any way implies how good or bad you are at the game, which is completely unrelated to it. All it says is that you played a lot. Right. Yeah. And exactly. You can just start at level 8 in that game, too, is a thing you can do.
I'm pretty sure that's what we did when we did our Dungeons and Dragons episode of this show. Weren't we like level 8?
We were level 8, yeah, when we did our Dungeons and Dragons episode.
Characters that we rolled 5 minutes before we like did that episode.
Well, there was some indication that he had at a previous school overplayed the game and something had happened, which was why he was reticent to get back involved.
Oh yeah, they definitely treat it like it's a heist and he's the guy who's gone straight, who's like working in the kitchen, who they need a wheelman. They definitely are like, nah, come on, man, you got to do it. And he's like, no, I put that behind me. My Dungeons and Dragons.
I'm in.
Yes. Yeah, but we don't exactly know, but it's definitely implied that maybe this has happened before. And yeah, he basically just, as wrestling fans would say, he starts living the gimmick. He believes that he is a level 8 mage and just starts walking around in his robe and thinking he can do. He has his spells on him, and he believes
he
that it's
ends
all
his
real.
relationship with the girl, as every D&D group needs to have the girl, because he's a celibate cleric in the game.
Yeah.
So of course, that actress looked really familiar to me, and I realized that she eventually becomes the First Lady of the United States for Air Force One with Harrison Ford. But in some ways, I thought she should be the lead, because it seems like after his character has the break in the tunnels, you stop seeing him at all, and you just start following her character. And you're being told he's doing all these weird things, but we don't get to see it. And it was almost like, why did he get top billing when for a huge portion of the film, we're not even getting any insight into what he's doing or getting to see the weirdness? She keeps saying that as she's switching her love interest from one to the other.
Yeah, it's weird because Act 1, it really feels like JJ and his many hats are the protagonist of this story.
Not a metaphor. JJ wears many hats, but that's not a metaphor. That's just
not
literal.
A metaphor. He wears 14 different hats throughout the movie, from a World War I style Pickelhauber helmet to a pilot's cap to many and sundry different chapeaus as he goes through the movie. But then it sort of shifts to Tom Hanks being the protagonist. But then definitely Kate, I think the character's name was, is absolutely in the pursuit of Robbie, is the protagonist. And then she immediately switches from being with Tom Hanks to being with not Fred from Scooby-Doo, the other guy.
Yep, the fourth person.
Yeah,
who's
the
in this
fourth
movie.
person. It
is wild too. Yeah, like to Wendy's point as well, is like she is such a central character and she has this deep relationship with him. She's definitely the closest to Tom Hanks's character in the movie, but absolutely does not get to be the one who keeps him from jumping off the building at the end. That is still JJ. Like she doesn't even get to be the like, hey, look at me. Remember that I'm a person and we dated. Nope. It's just I'm JJ. I'm the maze meister and I'm here to remind you that you can't jump.
And she's not even the one who initiates the really empathetic response at the very end. It's her new boyfriend who's the one who's like, okay, let's go with this. And the other characters decide they will do another fantasy game with him across the golden pond.
Yeah. It is weird that like it definitely starts with JJ being the protagonist, and it's clear that he has a thing for Kate, and then he knocks on Kate's door and Tom Hanks answers, and that feels like the switch to Tom Hanks being the protagonist. And then immediately after Tom Hanks' psychological break, immediately then Kate falls for Daniel, and yeah, and then there's the weird bit because like the whole thing starts in medias res with the investigation into the disappearance in the tunnels, and then backtracks, and then you'd think that it would end around when they get back to that point, as is a typical literary device and practice. No, that there's still 40 minutes left after they get back to the investigation, because then he's going crazy in Manhattan, stabbing dudes that he thinks are Gorlocks, and you know, another October, Andy, where someone goes to New York and immediately in Manhattan starts stabbing people. We just can't. We don't have a Jason movie this year, and yet we can't escape it. So. We can't escape people. So by that logic, did then Tom Hanks's Robbie Wheeling, did he take Manhattan?
No, I don't think he did, because we established, okay, so let's review. To take Manhattan, you have to put on a Broadway show. You do have to have a mental break. So he did kind of Kermit the Frog a bit in that, like, he forgot who he was and he lived a different life. So you know what? I think he came closer to taking Manhattan than Jason did.
All right. I think that's important to know.
Yeah.
For those keeping score at home.
The Muppets did take Manhattan. Tom Hanks, he took part of Manhattan. He
took Lower Manhattan?
He took Lower Manhattan, and then Jason did not take Manhattan.
Jason just visited Manhattan.
Mm-hmm. And only at the very end of that movie. I think Tom Hanks might have more screen time in Manhattan than Jason actually does.
Fair.
Well, then you have going back in Big. So you get to see him, Tom Hanks, in Manhattan, in New York toy stores and all that.
Yeah. So. And he does take the New York toy industry by storm in Big.
I think if we count Big, then I think we can say that Tom Hanks took Manhattan. If we're just saying Tom Hanks, the actor, then yeah, I think he did. I think he took Manhattan.
I did find it out. A little strange getting to see the Twin Towers. That does make it play differently now than probably, in the 90s or
from 1982 until September 10th, 2001.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah, it does hit a little bit different every day since then.
I did have a question of how did they know which tower he was in? So I get that they made the connection of the two towers.
I'm gonna quote The Simpsons, and they put all the jerks in Tower 1.
But yeah, I think we could have had a darker alternate ending where they're on the other tower trying to shout across that they picked wrong. They didn't even split up. They were so confident that they had the correct tower somehow.
They didn't split up there, but in the caves, when it would have been nice to stay together, they force each other apart so that Tom Hanks can have his psychotic break.
Well, I think movie law says if characters go into caves, they can't stay together. That is movie law.
But it also, this is again where you get into the people who wrote this do not understand how Dungeons and Dragons work, because obviously they're just LARPing. Like, we now know, we have a term for it. They're just live action role playing, and that's fine. But they can't, if there is a dungeon master, a maze, whatever, meister,
maze
whatever.
Controller.
I will never remember that term because it's terrible. But
the maze comptroller.
Yeah. So like, they still have to run the game. You can't split up and do stuff because there's no one to say what you're doing to. So you're just wandering around mumbling to yourself. Like that, you can't LARP alone.
Says you.
Do you often go to caves by yourself?
No comment.
Okay.
I will say during the early 80s, it was not uncommon for college students to go under their campuses and go into the steam caves, just the tunnels underneath campuses. Like my friends at the radio station did that.
I can say that is a true statement up until the early 2000s because... especially because I went to college in upstate New York and it was real cold, and that was an easy way to get around campus, was living in the steam caves. So it is the thing that happened. I think one of my friends lived there for a while, because that as one does.
On my campus, it was definitely something that it would be like the college radio station people and the art people would, but it was not a widespread phenomenon. But that was there's almost no reason why a college student goes missing that it's taken instantly so seriously, and then the private investigator goes, I know, he was doing role play of Dungeons and Dragons in the tunnels underneath the campus, and he must be dead. So.
Yeah, I love how quickly they're like, if he's in them caves, he dead.
Well, it does look. you know,
And he's right.
In his
Not saying he's wrong, but
I was going to say, in his defense, if you're just missing for days in those caves, like the steam tunnels under the school, a little bit of a different thing. But like they're just role playing at night in a cave that they are not familiar with the layout of. Like
that
that's
is not
a
open
great
to the
idea.
public.
That has been closed. Yeah. So like that's definitely, you know.
Oh no,
dangerous.
the investigator was right to assume that he died.
Yeah.
He was very histrionic from the very, very beginning. He kept just saying like the worst case scenario, using past tense, and really alarming the three of the quartet, the other proportions of the quartet of them. So, and it's interesting because again, I'm like, where have I seen that guy? And almost all the parents were in Twilight Zone episodes. And he was in a Twilight Zone episode where he played Mr. Death. So.
No, yeah, the older adults, the parents in this movie, they were all like that guy actors from the 70s and 60s and 70s. Yeah, it's a lot of like, if you go watch this movie, and I honestly, you should, I think that's where I'm landing in all of this.
Yes.
And you're at all a fan of that era of essentially repertory players from the 60s and 70s. They're all in this playing moms and dads.
I want to give a shout out to the private investigator for blaming Dungeons and Dragons, saying he's dead, and then not finding him. Like, we also just should talk about the fact that he does nothing to figure out that he's in New York City. And that's actually just comes from the friends. So.
Yeah, because he makes a collect call. Remember collect calls?
How much of this movie is unrelatable to the youth now? Like, there's no Twin Towers. There's no collect calls.
There is Dungeons and Dragons, which is having quite the renaissance at the moment, on the cover of Time magazine as we speak.
Yeah. Well, it is, by the way, it's an interesting thing what happened with Dungeons and Dragons, where like this continued through the 80s. 60 Minutes did a thing in 1985 where like Ed Bradley actually talked to Gygax and like did this very alarmist piece about like and then they ended up taking out all the satanic characters. Like, you know, they took out demons and devils and stuff from the game for a while until it was bought, and then in the current iterations and lately they've finally just been like, yeah, we don't care, they're all back. But like this affected Dungeons and Dragons for decades. Like, and it's only been recently that Dungeons and Dragons more popular than ever, and all that stuff's in it now.
Well, it actually served to make Dungeons and Dragons more popular because of this entire incident at the University of Michigan with that guy and that charlatan private investigator. The sales of Dungeons and Dragons quadrupled in a single year.
Well, because also, I mean, look, I've played Dungeons and Dragons. It's a fun thing. It's a very kind of nerdy thing to do, and I enjoy it. But if you tell me like you can summon a demon, or like that sounds awesome, I'm definitely going to try it now. It's like Ouija boards. Yeah, it's like Ouija boards. It's like anything else. Of like, I mean, we're all just going to push this around at the party. No, a spirit's going to do it. Well, now I'm buying it. Like, yeah, it's just you're just endorsing it.
So it's interesting you bring up Ouija boards because it really is only with The Exorcist that the Ouija board sort of changes tack as this idea of a harbinger of doom. Because initially Ouija boards were really thought of almost like Morse code so that you could communicate between the living and the dead. And it was seen as really like a scientific instrument. And it developed around
Brought
the
to
time.
you by Parker Brothers.
Well, Parker Brothers comes in just a little bit later.
Yeah.
Yes. But that really is the foundation of the Milton part of Milton Parker Brothers.
And I have to shout out Ouija boards invented in Baltimore. Gotta shout that out. So
yeah. And then eventually in like around the teens and 20s, it would be used as a parlor game really for flirtation because you would put the board like on the laps of two people. So it would be a way that you could bring sort of intimacy between young people. But in The Exorcist in 1973, I think, that begins where you got a Ouija board brought out, and the mother says, "Oh, what is this? Where did you find this?" And the character of Reagan says, "Oh, I've been playing it, and that's where I've been communicating with Mr. Howdy." So it's our first, this idea of a Ouija board or a board game as a way of having impact to the supernatural realm in some realistic way. That's one of those first occasions where this mass-produced board game is suddenly being thought of as potentially access to this supernatural realm in a way that's being treated as realistic, and at the same time in a film where science is being treated as slightly demonized, like religion is going to help you more than modern science. And yet it's a mass-produced board game that initiates it. And now if you see a Ouija board, you everyone knows what that means. It means some really bad stuff is going to happen soon.
Yes.
Yeah. Well, do we need to malign anything else? Is there anything else that we need to talk about before? I feel like we could probably pivot pretty soon.
Yeah. I mean, in broad strokes, this movie didn't do its homework into what Dungeons and Dragons was. And I think that probably a lot of that stems from Rona Jaffe's novel also sensationalizing the whole incident with Warren Worthington Egbert III. I forget his name.
Well, James Dallas Egbert III. We should also, I guess I didn't say this before, but worth noting that part of Jaffe's strategy was to write the book quickly before someone else could. So that was the work ethic. Like, be first, don't be the best. So that was a lot of it, too, of like trying to capitalize.
And, you know, like, if you, as just like I think as a caveat to people watching it now, this is shot with all the quality of a TV movie from 1982. And so it doesn't look great on 4K TV screens.
No, I don't think the Criterion has not, to my knowledge, yet restored it. So we'll all just wait.
So, hey, for it get on it, Criterion Collection.
I was super, or at least Kino Lorber.
Yeah. I was super disappointed with the hallucinated monster, especially because there were so many great special effects coming into place. It looked a bit just like one of the puppets from Land of the Lost, that Saturday morning TV show.
It looked like a Sleestack with a different mask on, 100%.
Yeah, 100% that mask was laying around already. That was just something they found in a prop closet and threw on an extra who made like $50 to be, you know, like stabbed by Tom Hanks for sure. Also, I mean, the thing that he talks to is just a light. Like his hallucinations are just a light. So that's the quality of special effects that we're working with.
So, fun fact.
I have another complaint.
Oh, go ahead.
Okay, he comes to the party. This film has come out in 1982, and he presents the wine, and JJ says 1987, a good year. And what is that about? And I even looked for like dates in the rest of the film, and you see 1982 on the walls. So I don't know why you have a wine from 5 years in the future.
That's a blown take that they left in.
100%. He was supposed to say 77 and just said 87. And they were like, no one will ever notice. No one's going to watch this movie decades from now.
And who's going to care? But it was disorienting.
For sure. I don't know. As we pivot, I think this is a good place to start for me. But in the Goreville, the monster costume, Kevin Peter Hall, who astute fans may know as the guy in the Predator costume in the Predator movies.
Nice.
Which I think is pretty cool.
That's pretty great. Yeah.
I think that's he is great at suit acting, whether the suit is great like in the Predator or terrible like in this movie.
Yep. That's the thing. Mask didn't look great, but I believed the performance. Like, definitely.
That clown and pantomime work was phenomenal.
Yeah. Also, my biggest and first silver lining is 100% the fact that Tom Hanks stabs a guy in this movie. Like, just you get to see Tom Hanks stab someone. Like, it really plays it out. It's never addressed later. We never know. Like, he had a knife with blood on it and tried to jump from the World Trade Center. And I guess his friends probably were like, he's going through enough. Let's clean this knife up and pretend that we never saw it.
I like that the supernatural voice was also his voice. So when he was talking to the Great Hall and all of those, so you got to see acting range there as well, because it wasn't totally obvious that it was his voice.
It's also fun because that could either be an Easter egg or that could just be budget. Like, Tom, we're not paying another guy. You just read these lines to yourself.
Why not both?
Yeah.
I like it as an Easter egg.
I do too.
That in some ways that there is this great kernel of someone has been playing a game and they've lost this line between fantasy and reality. In the film, it's supposedly the characters, but it's really presaging what's about to happen in society, where society will become totally unhinged between being able to tell other people's fantasy role games and what is reality.
Yeah, no, I think that's, and like it implies that, you know, it tells the viewer that it is indeed all in his head by the fact that it's his voice, and you know, it's so unintentionally clever. I love it.
Yeah. But yeah, I enjoyed that. I enjoyed some of the Dungeons and Dragons scene, even though I didn't feel like they understood it very well. There were times when they were playing or where, you know, like I feel like the four characters sold the idea that they were into it, like the four actors.
They were all really believable, I think. You know, and you know, JJ, maybe not the best actor, Christopher Makepeace, but he had some moments, man. You know,
and also he's not a great actor, but his hats are a silver lining.
His hats are definitely a silver lining.
Which might have been someone being like, well, he's not great. What are we going to do? I know. We'll distract the audience with hats. Like, that'll be your thing.
What was with his mother as the designer who kept turning his room into like something like an insane asylum and then a movie set with, like, you know, director's chairs?
I loved that it wasn't really explained other than it, like, this is a thing my kooky mom does. First, it's, you know, all white tiles and everything's white, and there's a white bird cage for my pet mina bird named Noah, I think it was.
The name changed a few times of that bird.
Yeah, I think that's true. And then it's like a noir film set later on, and JJ's just like, yeah, that's what my mom does. Anyways, let's try to find our friend that's gone insane.
I really kept thinking the bird was going to be important somehow, that like they were setting us up for something. The bird heard something and it's going to repeat it, or like there was some important thing waiting to happen. And it was like, no, he just has a bird. There's no.
At one point, the bird says something, and that clues Kate into realizing, wait, it's the Twin Towers. This whole time.
Yeah, but even then, it was still not like, I don't know. I thought the bird was going to have a bigger like payoff.
Yeah, it was thin, but it definitely did happen.
During the gameplay, I thought it was interesting that they would put that sort of slightly the music with the pipes. It was very much that idea of like Camelot. This as soon as they're playing, you get this otherworldly music that doesn't suggest college or New York or Animal House or anything like that.
I agree with that, and I did really like that music. I will say though, the like very made for TV melodramatic music that they kept playing was so weird and so like
just
out of sync with everything.
Yacht rock ballads.
Right. Yeah, that they would play like when they were all hugging and stuff. That definitely felt like they were for a different movie and they just put them in this anyway, which was very strange.
Honestly, that was so typical for melodramas. And so I kept thinking, that was why I kept thinking the Kate character was the lead, because I'm like, you're giving us these romantic soap opera music, but not of the era of soap operas, but when you'd have cinema that were soap operas, where you had where the structure would be, and then, and you'd have this, romantic connection music, which, it made me think, okay, she's the lead. Aren't we sort of following her?
Well, yeah. And it's because there's like the montage of her and Tom Hanks falling in love, where they're like running in the park and doing all these things set to this stuff. And then again, to like talk to the idea of her being the protagonist, like she has the voiceover narration at the end, like she was writing this all as a book. And she's like two boats beat back against the current, like going through this Great Gatsby style denouement at the end. And I loved it. It was so like, I've learned all of the different tropes of writing, so I'm going to cram them all in. And that made me really happy.
They also did one of the corniest tropes in all of storytelling that I always roll my eyes at. But in this, it honestly, of course they did it, because what else would they do here? Where she's like, I finally have the idea for my book. I'm going to write about this. And I always hate that when characters in a novel or any movie are like, this would make a good movie. Like, that's always such a ridiculous.
Yeah, the amount of times that it's been done to good effect is very small.
Adaptation and Princess Bride. I think those are it.
I'm going to say Crazy Ex-Girlfriend counts.
Okay. All right. So those three.
Yeah. But like Clerks 3, nope, not going to let that slide.
No, the last season of Game of Thrones, no good.
No, and most of the time, it's not going to pass. But I'm all for a story within a story. I don't mind that as a framing device. But it's like, oh man, no one would believe this, but I'm going to write it anyway.
Well, it's also adjacent to the old. This is like something out of a bad movie. Like when characters say that in a movie, that one's always good too.
Stand By Me, it works.
Yeah.
But no, most of the time it is very cheesy. Especially because like it's not bad when it's the framing device, but when it's like the lead character at the end, you learn it was them coming up with the book the whole time. Like that's when it's really cheesy and bad.
Also, because you mentioned the end, we should probably be doing more for Tom Hanks at the end. I don't really think anyone was properly addressing the issue at the end.
Or he's on house arrest for murder.
Because he stabbed that guy in New York.
By virtue of insanity.
Yeah. But even then, someone should probably be watching him. He's just roaming around in his giant backyard near that water. Like, I feel like someone should just be keeping an eye on him.
That may have an evil across the lake.
Oh, it definitely has an evil across the lake.
Well, his alcoholic mother is, because every day he gives her a coin for his food, and the next day it appears in his satchel again. So obviously his drunk mother is doing that. But
yeah, also silver lining the mom character on the way to school, because that was yeah. Also, yeah, they're not equipped because the whole backstory is that his brother ran away and nobody really figured that out either. So they're not doing great as a family.
I'm not going to lose this one. We're going to keep him in the backyard.
Maybe that's why they behave so histrionically as soon as it's like, what, he didn't go to class? That becomes the 4-alarm fire.
Yeah.
Well, they figured out the game made him crazy. That's why they let his friends come over and play the game with him some more.
It's like, yeah, he can't distinguish between reality and the game. So let's have him play the game more.
Well, I love Vera Miles' delivery of I drink to get through the day. It's so Neely O'Hara in Valley of the Dolls.
Yes.
Yeah.
I spent several days after that just saying that to people.
I also, we kind of mentioned it, but just to say it even in more clearly, Tom Hanks being in this is such a silver lining for me. Like, it's so delightful to see Tom Hanks slumming it in a movie like this, to see him doing bad melodramatic acting at the end, just all of it. Like, he's America's dad, and he's beloved, and he's beyond reproach, and it's so funny that he's in this movie. So I just want to make that clear.
No, I agree 100%. This movie is utterly forgotten without Tom Hanks' involvement.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I agree with that.
But yeah, like it's such a wonderful time capsule though, and I think that's a silver lining, is that like it really gets how brown the early 80s was in decor and everything, because all nostalgia for the 80s is all neon and bright and everything, but this movie really nails how brown the early 80s were. Yeah,
for sure. I also, man, the Twin Towers were pretty new when this was written.
About a decade,
they must have been so proud of that when Jaffe or whoever made the connection between Lord of the Rings and the Twin Towers. Like, that's just a home run. Like, that is all kind. And I never in a million years would have guessed that that's where this movie ended when it started. So credit for that.
No, there's no chance you're predicting that this movie ends with a standoff on top of the two towers.
Well, especially because it's based on a real thing, but that all of that's just made up. That has nothing to do with the real story at all. That was all made up for this book.
That was Rona Jaffe throwing a little zazz in there to make it pop.
And right call. Absolute right call.
Absolutely the right call.
Well, good way of like moving it from Michigan to New York by doing something location specific.
And again, like with the lack of research done, she's like, I don't want to go to Michigan for this book. I'm just going to set it in my town.
They all would have been drinking Faygo and painting their face like the Insane Clown Posse. So it would have been very distracting if it was Michigan. So, I think it was right. Was it clear that it took place in upstate New York, or did I just assume that it did? Like, was that stated?
It's never said, but it's at SUNY Purchase. I mean, let's be honest here. Like, let's fully call this out that this is in the Hudson Valley. It's very much of that area, and 100%.
Well, and also he got to New York, so like that it couldn't have been that far. The city, no. I don't feel like. Yeah,
I would love to have seen him navigating Metro North in his delirious state. Like, I think that would have been fun.
Well, he thought the subway was a dragon, so that would have been an interesting trip for sure.
Yes.
Wait, and there was that whole vignette in the subway system.
Mm-hmm. Where he made a friend with a homeless guy who lives in the subway.
Who he thought was a sage.
Who he thought was a sage. A lot of good yes-anding between the two of them in that scene. They were definitely on the same wavelength. And there was like you thought there'd be more with that, but then they didn't really. That guy just kind of disappears. So we also don't know if Tom Hanks killed the guy that he stabbed. That's not really clear either.
That's what I was wondering. I mean, he was stabbed, but I mean, maybe he was just, I don't know if he was mortally wounded.
I mean, there was so much stabbing in 1982 New York. I feel like who would have noticed? What's another stabbing?
Well, that was like what they advertised. They were like, come to New York, get stabbed. You know, that was part of the deal. That's why the I Heart New York shirt was so big, because it was a big red heart and it covered up your stab wound. So that was, I
thought it was a Target.
It's both.
Yeah. It is, and then they cleaned up Times Square, and now it's just full of Elmos, and we all lost something when that happened. So
when they got rid of the stabbing and the peep shows, Times Square really changed.
The values on which New York was founded, peep shows and stabbings, and they really lost their identity when they just became another Chinese theater like here in LA. It's just photo ops with people who bought costumes at Hot Topic. So it's, it lost its identity.
Dirty Party City Elmo costumes.
None of the settings looked very threatening to me. Not even the caves. And New York, even with the scary guys, did not look very threatening.
No, this movie, you know, and I guess because it was an 80s TV movie, it doesn't go as hard as I thought it was going to go. I really thought we were going to lean into Satanism and carnage. And yeah, the caves look very filmed on a soundstage. New York probably also filmed on a soundstage. Like nothing really looks real or threatening, or like there never really felt like that much danger, even when he was about to jump off the top of the building.
Because that may have just been on the roof of the studio they were shooting at.
Probably. I can't imagine they shot that on the top of the World Trade Center. Like that they bothered.
Yeah. This was a fun movie.
In New York.
I enjoyed it. I really did enjoy this movie. Like it was fun. A lot of good campy acting and music. And again, hell of an ending. Like really, really strong third act. And I do applaud it for going as hard as it did in a third act.
Yeah, that's definitely you had this projection from the beginning that you'd end up at the caves, and instead you're in another city, you know, potential, that sort of LSD element of saying I'm going to fly, because that was always one of the things in culture that they'd say, you know, don't do LSD because you'll jump off a building thinking you know how to fly. And now it was Dungeons and Dragons will make you think you can fly. But someone saying, hey, I'm in charge of the game, that'll snap you right out of it.
Yep.
You would think that would be more confusing if you believed you were in the game. It'd be more confusing for someone to say that they controlled the game. But
one would think, yeah, they're like, wait a minute, controlled the game, but I'm actually Pardue the cleric.
Right. That means you're God. I've just met God on the top of this like building. Yeah, that would be way more confusing.
And the brother's name being Hall. I mean, I don't think I've ever met a Hall in my entire life.
Yeah, there's Hal's, but yeah, you don't usually get
met
Hall.
Hal's. I don't know.
Yeah.
You know what? People can be named anything.
I actually like the idea of, instead of his name being Hall, it was actually Hell, and everyone just misunderstood the way he was saying it. So it sounded like Hall instead.
That he just had a vague speech impediment. Hall.
Yes, that was my brother.
My brother Hall.
Halloween, by the way, and they
That's
didn't
true.
really develop the Halloween thing other than the fact that it gave you a chance to have people like wearing costumes, and it sort of brings up that sort of underlying cosplay aspect of, if you're going to do live action in person, if you're going to do role playing in person, it's letting you know there's some foundation for modern cosplay in that. And then connecting that with the masquerading of Halloween is nice.
And I think this is as great a place as any to end it, is that Professor Wendy found a way to tie it back to Halloween, because the movie did take place during Halloween. So I think that really locked it in with our theme. So that's why we vet our guests so thoroughly, because they're that good at keeping us on task. This may be the most focused episode we've done in 2 years.
It is. I think it's the smartest episode we've done, and it was still pretty dumb. So I'm proud of us. But yeah, no, Wendy, thank you so much for doing this.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Is there anything that you want to promote, or you want to like point people towards, or tell people about this season, or anything? The floor is yours for anything you want to say at this point.
Well, I have to say I did an insanely deep dive on the Satanic Panic. So I've had utter rage about it. And I guess one of the things I would say is I never really looked at the Dungeons and Dragons aspect, because it really was the most benign aspect of all of the Satanic Panic. And that's in part because you had a corporation that was being attacked. So they were able to have lawyers and support in order to have it so that people didn't end up in jail like all the other areas of Satanic Panic. But I guess I could say look up on YouTube. I've got some videos about the history of Halloween and Guy Fawkes Day and Day of the Dead. I did my master's on Halloween, so I've been studying that for decades. And this month is my favorite month of the year. Almost everyone I know sends me endless memes and asks what I'm doing. And so if you like Halloween, you can. I've got a couple videos on YouTube, but I don't really have anything to plug except my amazing class at Glendale College called Magic, Witchcraft, and Religion, and you can take it remotely. So even if you're another part of the country, enroll at Glendale College and take a really fun night class. I'll talk to you about information.
Which Molly took and loved, and so I can vouch for it on that level. Also, Wendy's an amazing resource for Halloween decorated houses in LA, so that's also
I bet you there's some amazing
fun
ones.
Do people go hard in LA because there's a lot of people in the industry or people that have money and they do really elaborate stuff, and it's fantastic. Yeah, for sure.
My next thing is I have a theory that Southern California is the best place on the planet for Halloween decorations. So I need to talk to Home Depot and Lowe's to see if my hypothesis is supported. But there are a number of things, like the people in the industry, the fact that we're so close to Disneyland. And by the way, it is the Inland Empires, the Valley. If you live in a suburban area, and there's a good chance that you'll have much better Halloween decorations than really sort of dense urban centers. So.
Yeah, no, I think that's an interesting study. And I bet, especially because the weather is so nice, because like where I grew up in upstate New York, it was often snowing by October 31st. So Halloween was iffy at best.
I do have one final statement. I would like to say, for the people who have kept their 18-foot tall skeletons up all year, yes, it is true. You are the real heroes.
I think that's a great place to end it, for sure.
Silver Linings Playback is a production of HoboTrashCan.com. If you enjoyed the show, please rate or review it on Apple Podcasts. Hear more great shows on the Peak Sloth Podcast Network.